All right, here we go. Settle in. As I promised, yesterday I showed something from Willie. Today I'm going to show something that Grammy found while cleaning closets that Sammy made. So, Sammy, if you're not watching yet, you better turn this on and take a look because you made this. This is a book that Sammy made. It's in front of my face. Here it goes. It says, can you read that? All Kinds of Dinosaurs by Sam. And then it has pages. This is Stegosaurus. And a, whatchamacallit? All Kinds of Dinosaurs. Wander. What does that say? All kind of dinosaurs were bigger than me. And then Sam made this book. And see, in the back of it, he chewed out the pages. So, that's the book that Sam made. So, Sam, if you're not watching, you better turn this one on and see your book. See that? Okay. Yesterday, joke. Joke. We can't forget the joke. Okay. What did the duck say to the bartender? Just put it on my bill. Got it? Bill. What state has the smallest pop? Minnesota. Got it? Minnesota. Okay, those are jokes for today. Okay. Yesterday, or the last reading, however you're listening to this, Trey Clark was really bored. He couldn't find anyone to talk to. And Caleb Crabtree was seasick, and he was throwing up into his chamber pot, and his face was green. But the captain gave him a bottle of gin to drink, and he started to feel much better. So he came out of the cabin, and we found out that Trey has a sister that still lives in the hacienda. So we learned a little bit about the family, and today we got a long one. So buckle in. Get yourself a nice, comfortable chair. This is an exciting chapter that we're going to read. It's called Rope. So in case you forget, we're reading The Rope on the Jungle by Gary Jennings. Okay? In case you forget the name of the book. And today we're on chapter 4, Rope. Now they're still on the boat, the Godspeed. Let me get some apple juice here. Let me explain about this apple juice. The apple juice is really good, but we can't go out and get any more. So that's really apple juice and water, about half and half, because we got to make it stretch because we can't go to the store and get any more apple juice. And once that's gone, it's gone. Pretty soon I'll be drinking just plain old water. And then after the plain old water, I don't think we'll ever run out of water. Do you? No. I don't think so. Okay. Settle back. Here we go. Rope. What with the monotonously calm weather and the monotonously vile meals, Trey and Caleb would have found the voyage a tedious vexation, but for each other's company. Captain Hootsma, when not hopelessly drunk, was in all too obvious misery of a hangover, or what he called a katzenjammer. And since the captain was often indisposed, all the work of running the Godspeed was left to the under officers. This meant that the English boatswain Beadle and Caleb's fellow Bay Stater, Mr. Bodfish, were almost always either too busy or too weary to utter more than a few words. The cook, too, was forever busy, valiantly trying to concoct something appetizing, or at least edible, out of the cheap and scant selection of food supplies at his disposal. So Trey did not too frequently take to the opportunity to chat in Spanish with the sailors, and thus leave his friend to mope. He made himself available whenever Mr. Crabtree felt like talking. This was no sacrifice for Trey. This was no sacrifice, for Trey learned a great deal about rope, and, as Caleb had predicted at their first meeting, he found it anything but a dull subject. Who would think that rope would be interesting? But it is. Okay, some apple juice and water. Where am I? Okay. For one thing, he discovered that all he had been mentioning rope and knots and variations on that theme all his life, without ever really being aware of it. Just for instance, said Mr. Crabtree, as they lounged at their favorite place at the rail one day, Spider, common enough word, and it's becoming rather a sinister one. Somebody is as creepy as a spider, or as evil as a spider. All that, but spider merely comes from an old-time word meaning spinner. Did you know that? One who spins a thread. For another example, the stirrup on the saddle comes from a step rope, which is all a stirrup was originally, a rope with a loop in it. You know what a stirrup is? The stirrup hangs down on the side of a horse, and then it goes like this, and then it's like this with the bottom, and like that with the bottom, and it's tied on. And you put your foot in there, and you step onto the horse. Okay, yeah, I know all about horse riding. Yes, I do. I'll be doggone, said Trey, who was also trying to learn to swear like a straight sailor, but hadn't got very far. Then there are all the proverbs. Give a man enough rope and he'll hang himself. Or people talk of a knotty problem, or they talk about a man coming to the end of his rope. That's plain enough. And they also speak of somebody or something coming to a bitter end. And not one of 1,000 knows where the expression comes from. Do you know? I never thought about it, said Trey, thinking about it. But I guess I don't. You see those heavy posts up there atop the bow? There are 2 others astern. You may remember when we were tied up on the dock, the hawsers were secured from the wharf bollards to those posts. Well, those posts are called bitts. When you paid out the hawser rope or cable to the very last hitch or loop around the bit, then you've come to the bitter end of your rope. The bitter end. I'll be doggoned. But how did it come to mean, well, really a bitter end? Said Trey. Because it can sometimes signify disaster on a shipboard. To pay out a rope to its very end. Say you're in a storm at sea, and your only hope is to heave to and ride a storm at sea. And your only hope is to heave to. I read that twice. And read it out at anchor. Well, you pay out your anchor cable or chain, and you find you're in such deep water that you pay out all the way to the bitter end. And still your anchor won't catch bottom. You're in bad trouble now. Trey said again he was doggoned. Mr. Crabtree went on to comment that actually very few of the terms derived from rope and its uses, long in everyday language, had come from the sailor's jargon. All right, time for more apple juice and water. It's good water, good apple juice. I don't suppose you're old enough, Trey, to have received many gifts of a true lover's knot, but I'll wager your sister is. Just a simple bow knot of cord, usually presented on a box of candy, or a bouquet of flowers to suggest that man and woman are romantically intertwined. He laughed. Ha ha ha. There's a cynical saying about it that the lover's knot is the only knot which, once tied to the tongue, cannot be untied by the teeth. He added hurriedly, "Please do not be doggone about it." Trey laughed too, and said only that he would remember to tease Susan. She did get one on Valentine's Day one year from the Homer boy on the hacienda next to ours. "Every knot and every splice has a name," Mr. Crabtree went on, "but they're not all the same in all languages. What we call the wall and crown knot, a French sailor knot, let me start that over. What we call the wall and crown knot, a French sailor, calls, the pig's tail with a death's head knot." He snorted disapprovingly. "That's the French for you. But looky here." There's a light rope lying atop the nearest hatch cover. Caleb picked out the end of it and showed it to Trey. The rope terminated in a small loop. The end merely bent back among itself, and the strands woven neatly into a body of the rope a few inches down its length, altogether like the eye of a needle. Not only does every knot have a name, there are names for its various parts and workings. Now, this here is no knot. 'Tis a splice. A simple eye splice. Run the free end of the rope through this eye, fetch it down to the loop, and you got a cowboy's lasso. But just a simple eye splice has a whole anatomy, a neck, legs, crotch, arms, throat, bosom, and of course the eye, the opening. "I'll be," Caleb winced. "I'll be jiggered," Trey said. "What's more, if you were to describe this splice to a layman, he'd think that you were talking about some fairy tale ogre, you see." And he pointed out the parts and named them. Its neck is between its legs. Its crotch is between its arms. Its throat and bosom are in its eye. And it has but only one eye. In time, Trey began to carry with him a paper and pencil and make notes of Mr. Crabtree's discourses. Any farm, orchard, or ranch uses cord and rope aplenty. The Clark Orange Plantation employed every kind from good imported manila to crude ropes of twisted grass, made by the Peonies on the spot when necessary. But these field or orchard workers would tie the rope workers would tie the ropes, good ones or poor, by twisting them together any way until they held. And too often, no matter how impressively lumpy the knot, it didn't hold. This resulted in everything from annoyance and inconvenience to downright loss of equipment and hazard to humans. Trey privately determined that his first act as the new master of the hacienda would be a sweeping reform of all the rope work done there. All this while, the SS Godspeed was placidly moving south at 8 knots. Here's the boat. That's how the boat was going. Rockety-dockety-dockety. That's placid. Rocking of the boat. Northward, pushing against the Gulf Stream, but seldom close enough inshore for the passengers to catch a glimpse of land. For 2 days, while the ship made a cautious progress through a dense and clammy Carolina fog bank, Trey and Caleb had to suspend all conversation of more than a few words at a time because of the booming of the foghorn every couple of minutes. Oh, that's foghorn. That ear-shattering and repetitious noise, ah-ooh, had them nearly in a shell shock by the time they got clear of the fog. But the sudden silence of the foghorn and the speeding up of the ship was not all they had to be thankful for. They had left the fog behind, and, back of that, the bright but sometimes too crisp October weather. Now they were gliding down the Florida coast, and the climate was subtropical, warm days and nights, balmy breezes, breathtakingly beautiful cloud banks around the horizon. During the day, magnificent sunsets at evening, and at night a phosphorescence in the sea that made their bow waves and their wakes astern glow a ghostly greenish white against the dark sea. Mr. Crabtree, who had continued to dress rather formally in a shiny blue serge suit until now, began to come on deck casually dressed and coatless. For the first time, Trey noticed that the man wore a belt made of plaited rope. Why not? And buckled not with a metal bucket, but with a curious ornamental varnished knot. "The monkey's fist knot," said Caleb. "I told you every knot, even the kind done for pure fancy, has a name. And I'll tell you a secret. It's always been my ambition to have one named after me. Because in all the history of seafaring knots and rope, only one man has ever had a knot named for him. And that man is Matthew Walker." Time for a little more apple juice and water. I gotta drink that slow. "Who is Matthew Walker?" asked Trey. "Was," said Mr. Crabtree. "They say he was a pirate, caught and convicted and brought up for sentencing. The judge gave him a chance to escape hanging if Walker could invent a knot right then and there that the judge couldn't make himself, and the rope wouldn't go excuse me, around Walker's neck. And Matthew Walker did just that." "Well," said Trey, "if the judge couldn't copy of it, how has anybody else done it?" "Oh, the Matthew Walker knot isn't complicated. Any seaman can cast one. And it's jolly useful, too. What Walker did in court must have been something else. As I say, it's just a legend." Now the SS Godspeed rounded the tip of Florida and turned almost due west through the strait between the United States and Cuba. Here the freighter was actually in the Gulf Stream, where the waters were about as warm as the air and abounded with tropical sea life. One morning Trey was leaning on the port rail when he saw what he looked to be a shark's fin cutting out of the water some yards off. A shark's fin. Ooh. Curiously, though, the fin was leaning over at an angle away from the ship. It wasn't like that. It was kind of like that. All right, that's a shark's fin leaning over. After a while, the fin doing nothing interestingly, Trey ambled over to starboard and was surprised to see there an identical fin of equal distance from the vessel, and likewise leaning away from it. Struck by a sudden thought, Trey leaned as far as he could over the rail and peered down. The water was clear enough for him to recognize what he saw: a monster manta ray directly beneath the ship. What he had supposed were separate fins were actually just the tip of its wings, extending from one on either side of the Godspeed. The freighter's width was 40 feet, and the keel was some 20 feet underwater. For that more or less diamond-shaped devilfish to be cruising comfortably beneath the keel, yet curling its wings up to cut the water on either side, The manta had to be 140 feet from wingtip to wingtip. That incredible creature could have far overlapped an entire baseball diamond, with its whipped tail extending well out in the center field. Can you imagine such a manta ray? A little more apple juice and water. Gotta drink that slow. Trey did not see plenty of shark's fins. And the leaping, gnashing, horrible, beautiful sharks themselves, blues, hammerheads, threshers, whenever the cook emptied his galley garbage over the lee gunwale, the garbage brought the seagulls swarming around too. And other birds Trey had never seen before. They were diving petals. Was actually flew underwater and would sometimes burst up to the sea surface in full flight. There were the graceless gray pelicans that plunged in the floating offal, stuffed their beaks until the beaks sagged like bags, and then flew off to some unseen shore to eat their plunder in leisure. There were the stormy petrels, the mother carry chickens, believed to be a Cuban deckhand confided to Trey, the souls of drowned seamen. The Godspeed frequently plowed through a school of flying fish. These foot-long creatures, their four elongated, transparent pectoral fins, made them look like oversized and overweight dragonflies, would squirt from the water, sometimes gliding as far as the length of a football field, crossing and crisscrossing ahead of the ship, alongside and astern. Many of them leaped so high that they landed helplessly on the deck. On 3 separate occasions, George Washington Wallace picked up enough of them to prepare the only real decent meals served aboard the Godspeed. Trey also saw hundreds of porpoises, among the liveliest and loveliest things one can ever see at sea. Schools of them would swim, almost dance flirtatiously alongside, keeping pace with the ship. Sometimes the big, gleaming, blue-gray sea mammals would leap along the bunch, sometimes in a single file, and in that formation their simultaneous lunges from the water gave the illusion of a long, thick snake undulating across the ocean's surface. Indeed, this illusion may have been a long ago origin of the mariner's unshakable belief in sea serpents. A little more apple juice. That's good. On several occasions, Trey tried his hand at fishing. Using merely a line and a hook, baited with whatever George Washington Wallace could spare him from the galley. Balls of oatmeal dough, or bits of pickled pork. But possibly because of the questionable bait, which he had to eat, but the fish didn't, Trey had little luck. It was probably just as well. If anything the size of a marlin or a swordfish had snatched his hook, Trey, or at least several of his fingers, would have gone outside. For all his hours at the rail, with the line trailing in the sea, he caught only one fish, and that one he didn't keep. It was as long as Trey's arm, gracefully tapered with a high, blunt forehead. The fish properly called the cory fin, mistakenly called by American fishermen the dolphin, and called by Mexican dorado, the golden one. The Mexican word is the most descriptive, for the fish came out of the water a light iridescent gold in color. But when Trey had it on deck, to his amazement, the fish began to change color. Glowing bands of metallic blue, green, and pink overflowed the golden hue. A whole rainbow of colors blooming, blending, fading. Fish can't make a noise, the watching Mexican crewman told Trey. That is the Dorado's way of weeping as he dies. The fish were spoken without emotion. The words were spoken without emotion. But they stuck in pain in Trey's heart. He instantly removed the hook, gently lifted the fish, and dropped it back into its element. The Mexico crewman swore in genuine bewilderment, and the captain's table had to forgo one last delicious fresh-caught meal. Mr. Crabtree came out on deck to find Trey rather dispirited and depressed by his near murder of that gorgeous fish. Now, a little more apple juice. So Caleb told him another story about rope, and this one cheering up type of story. Caleb said, "Ever since ancient times," he began, "there have been superstitions about rope having magic properties. Back in the early days of seafaring, witches, used to tie wind knots in short lengths of rope and sell them to ship's masters. Whenever a craft got becalmed, the captain would simply open the proper knot for the wind he wanted. East wind, west wind, whatever. Even today, magicians, stage magicians, couldn't get along without rope." And I couldn't get along without apple juice and water. "I thought they all used rabbits and silk hats," said Trey. "I'm talking about what they call escape artists. There was one young fellow I saw perform at the Howard in Boston. The Great Houdini, he called himself, and he claimed he could get loose from any kind of tie-up or manacles or locked boxes. Well, in one of his stunts, he had his female assistant bind him tight to a chair. Then she put a screen in front of him. A few seconds later, he stepped out from behind the screen, free as a bird and bowing to all the applause. Then he went back behind the screen, the girl moved it away, and there he sat, all tightly bound again." "Gosh," said Trey, "he was good." Caleb sniffed. "Oh, it was impressive, all right. The audience just goggled. But he never even needed the assistant. He could have done it all himself. She simply put it in a modified fisherman's knot, a running knot with a check knot. I'll show you how to make one. When the loop is bound over a person's body and the back of the chair, that person can slacken or tighten it in an instant. Loose it and get out, and get back in and tighten it again." Pretty nifty knot. "I'll be doggone." Caleb gave him a severe look but went on. Next, he called for volunteers in the audience to tie him up. Called for a brand new rope. Besides, to show he wasn't using any secret devices. And a whole bunch of Boston dock wallopers swarmed up on the stage. Houdini told them to use the whole rope, wrap it around him good and use any knots they pleased. Well, they left him swathed like a mummy, and with knots all over. Darn fools. They should have known better. All right, a little more apple juice and water. "I get it," said Trey excitedly. "He had switched ropes while they were crowded on stage." "Not a bit of it. He wanted a new rope, partly because the audience figures a new rope surely has to be strong, but mainly because a new rope always has a lot of stretch in it. And of course, the longer the rope, the more they wrapped around him, the more give there was in it. Knots or no, all a man has to do, even a puny man, is flex out his arms and legs, and that rope will stretch. Shoot! It was out from behind that screen in seconds. I'll be dog." So the next night, Caleb said loudly, I came back to the Howard and brought in my pocket just 2 short lengths of well-used, well-stretched hemp. When Houdini called for volunteers this time, I shouldered them aside and said, "Let me do this, mates." I just bound for Houdini's ankles and wrist with a single turn of rope apiece, but I cast a tomfool knot in each rope. That's a double loop through a running knot. I'll show you that one too. And we put the screen in front of him and waited. You mean Houdini couldn't? I knew blamed well he couldn't. Well, that was the longest wait until even the audience began to shuffle their feet and look embarrassed. A little more apple juice here. Finally, Houdini said something, and his assistant helped him to hop out from behind the screen, still as prettily parceled as I'd left him. I had to open the knots for him. He asked my name and introduced me to the audience, and did they clap like mad. He told them I was the only man ever in his career to bind the great Houdini so he couldn't escape. But under his breath, Houdini was telling me that if I ever showed up at the Howard again, while he was performing there, he'd refused to sell me a ticket. I wish I could have seen that, said Trey, gazing admiringly at the old man. There's one thing I wish I could get to see, said Caleb, somewhat wistfully. I heard many a sailor back from India tell of watching the India rope trick. You certainly heard of it, where a Hindu faker tosses a rope up in the air, and it stays there all by itself, while his boy assistant climbs it. If I ever do see it, I'll wager I can tell you how it is done. Speaking of boy assistants, said Trey, and for the first time he suggested his going along with Mr. Crabtree into Chiapas. Out of the question, lad, said Caleb firmly. I've never had children, never been married. I wouldn't know how to take proper care of a young boy. I simply couldn't take the responsibility. Trey had his own opinion of who would be responsible for whom, but fortunately he had sense enough not to raise the point. Besides, Caleb went on, you have responsibilities of your own to face up to, taking charge of your estate and all. That's only formalities and paperwork and red tape, Trey said. Meantime, there are 100 peons to do the work about the place, and my sister is much better manager than I am. I won't be missed, and if I'm putting off getting there for a while. You'll be missed if something terrible happens to you in those jungles, said Mr. Crabtree, still adamant. There is jungle not too far from our hacienda, sir, Trey persisted, in the street of Tamapalupiapas. Boy, my Spanish is not very good, but maybe a little apple juice will help. Apple juice and water. Okay. I grant you, it's nothing like the jungles of Chiapas, but it is jungle, and I've been there, so I'm not a total greenhorn. He went on to point out that he knew the equipment that they would need, and some of the hazards to avoid. He spoke the language fluently, and knew the customs of Mexico. He could learn to help with the rope splicing. Needless to say, Trey finally talked Caleb into it. Or, to put it another way, Caleb finally acknowledged the practicality of Trey's arguments. Caleb still expressed misgivings, but it was agreed that henceforth he and Trey would be a team and would go on to Ziamapan together. Crabtree and Clark, muttered the senior partner. It sounds like a vaudeville turn. Well, I've never seen much vaudeville, said Trey. Our headmaster disapproved, like your Reverend Noseworthy. But what I have seen was fun. I bet you this expedition turns out to be fun too. He had never yet mentioned the scary things Captain Hootsma had told him about the Chiapas jungle, or the outright warning from the scary Z tribesman seamen. Do you ever, do not ever go to Zuampapan, he warned. Well, that's the end of the chapter. All right. There'll be another one tomorrow.